Johnny Sig and Kevin Perry are back, and we're here to talk about, obviously, boxing and also about, a little bit of pot. What's your thoughts on pot in the sports world? Kevin, let's hit it. Let's get to it. The sound of the bell. We love it. What's good? What's good, Kev? How you doing today, brother?
Pretty good. Should be an interesting show today. We're going to talk about a few different things today. Definitely interested in getting to some different issues and, kind of getting away from just talking about boxing action, but some of the more, I guess you could call political stuff going on in the sport of boxing. First of all, first thing we're going to talk about today, Nevada Commission changes its rules on drug testing. And I guess, first of all, pretty much what we're going to, first talk about is this article here. And I'm going to kind of just read a little bit of, the new development that we have going on here. And basically, Nevada State Athletic Commission, this is according to MSN.com article by Brent Brookhouse. Nevada State Athletic Commission will no longer punish athletes for testing positive for marijuana metabolites in pre or post fight tests. This ends a controversial policy that has long been criticized by fans, fighters, and media. And the vote to amend the Nevada State Athletic Commission policy was unanimous. And obviously, the most high-profile case in the history of the commission came in 2015 when Nick Diaz tested positive for marijuana after his bout with Anderson Silva. So what are your thoughts on that, John? I mean, it's a pretty huge development. I think it's a big win for boxers and mixed martial artists in general, because it just seems like a very egregious thing to, for somebody to kind of get fined for, somebody to lose to be suspended for. They lose a lot of money. And I think we both can agree that, marijuana is therapeutic, but it's definitely not a performance enhancing drug. What are your thoughts on that?
That's exactly where I was going to start, is saying that this is not a performance enhancing drug. It's a therapeutic drug. It's a recovery drug. It's a mental relaxation drug. I went all Dwyer there on that one, but I tell you what, that's the truth, man. Like, pot, I don't smoke it. I'm going to tell you why. It makes me lazy. It makes me silly. I laugh. I go to my kitchen. I eat everything in my kitchen. And I talk a lot of nonsense to my wife, and then I pass out. And this all happens within 10 minutes. Okay. But everyone handles marijuana differently. I think it's okay for fighters to recover using marijuana. I know a lot of fighters. I will not mention their names, but they've been on my podcast. They've been parts of my interviews in the past. They've also been parts of many other interviews that were not a part of my show in the past and discussed the benefits of marijuana. There are certain drugs, if you want to call it a drug, I don't consider it a drug. I have nothing against it. Again, I can't take it because I will pass out. It doesn't work well with me. However, but there's a lot of people that in the past, they've spoken about the fact that they've done it numerous times and they've functioned as human beings. And unfortunately, in the past, we've had fights. I believe the Mike Tyson fight, back in the day against Andrew Golota became a no contest because Mike Tyson tested positive for marijuana. Like, that's bullshit. I think that it's okay if these guys smoke. It's their bodies. It's their choice. I don't think you should be high when you're in the ring. Okay, I do have a thought on that. I want to ask you that question.
Would help them a whole lot if they're high when they're in the ring. I think the reaction time would be a little
okay, that's where I was going, Kevin. Yeah. I was going to ask you, do you think it's okay for them to be high in the ring?
I mean, if they want to get knocked out, I mean, it's their prerogative. But I don't know. I mean, I think that the problem with testing for marijuana, also in my opinion, is marijuana is not something where, just say you smoke a joint today, it'll be gone out of your system tomorrow. So just because you tested positive doesn't mean you actually just smoked a joint or a bong load or whatnot, what have you, 24 hours ago. You could have smoked something a month ago and it's still in your system. You can still test positive. So I think it's very unfair to assume that somebody who is smoking a little toke every now and then is going to be high right before the event, or they were high during the event because they failed a post-fight drug test. So I think it's a little bit unfair. I mean, obviously, another conversation could be about cocaine or heroin or some other drugs which don't stay in your system as long. But they're kind of putting everything in the same category, and I believe it's just very unfair.
Not fair at all.
Who train and for a lot of them, it's just something that they use to unwind. It's been legalized in most of the states in the U.S. now, so it's definitely not a criminal issue anymore. So I think this is a good move in the right direction for the Nevada Commission. It's very rare that they get things right, but I think in this situation, they did get it right. I will actually want to move on to another development that is pretty much kind of on the same lines as this one. There's actually a track athlete. We're just going to show you her here. Olympic medal hopeful. I believe her name is Sha'Carri Richardson. And she's actually been banned or barred from the Tokyo Olympics for testing positive for marijuana. And she was Olympic gold medal hopeful for the United States. And I think it's pretty sad. This is an article by Justin Singer. He's a chief executive and co-founder of Ripple, a Colorado-based cannabis company. Let's just read a little quote from him here. He says, Richardson, who's the fastest woman in the U.S., she had designs on being the first American woman to win 100-meter gold since Gail Devers in 1996. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen anymore because Richardson was suspended by the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency on Friday after testing positive for marijuana. According to the article, I'm just paraphrasing, she did know the rules and she did make that was her own choice to do something that she should know better, that she could get caught for that. But obviously, like, we agreed earlier, the rules are just completely out of the scope of where things are going as far as people's attitudes about marijuana and the laws in general. Just give your quick thoughts on that, because I thought that was something to bring up. It's not technically boxing related, but a lot of these testing agencies, USADA, for example, they test athletes for the Olympic Games, and they also test many of the athletes for some of these commissions in the U.S. So it's a similar issue, and it's kind of I wouldn't say hypocritical, but it's kind of a weird double standard that the Olympic committees are taking a little bit longer to be a little bit more lenient on this issue. How do you feel about that?
I think it's completely unfair what they did to her. We got a beautiful woman here that's working her ass off, literally, to be a great champion and great athlete. Maybe she smoked some weed in between all that. Whatever she was doing apparently was working, and it wasn't hindering her ability.
Her performance.
It was not hindering her ability.
I don't know if it was helping her performance.
It wasn't doing anything, but it wasn't doing anything but probably making her sleep better at night, brother. Let's face facts, know? And I think that that's absolute bullshit what they did to this beautiful lady who's out there trying to do wonderful things. And it does enrage me because of the fact that I know what it's like to be an athlete. I have friends that are, big time pot smokers and they do their job just fine and they go through life just fine. And it helps them actually have a mental state that stabilizes them as individuals. So I don't see what the bad is. If marijuana works for you guys, I'm going to say right now, blaze up, get a light, smoke it, enjoy it, and listen to this podcast. And I guarantee you the podcast will be even better if you're high.
I mean, I hope it helps. I hope it doesn't put you to sleep. But I guess not all of the marijuana they got out there puts people to sleep. They got some other stuff out there that does the exact
I
opposite.
used to grow pot, bro, like for CBD and also for obviously for the medical industry and whatnot. And the benefits are amazing. And it's a beautiful plant. I wish I could smoke it more. I do occasionally, but the problem is, like I said, I just eat everything. I fall into hysterics of laughter, and then I just pass out. I'm completely useless. My wife will tell you that.
But I guess if you pass out, then you're not harming anybody, right? You know, puts you to sleep.
That's it. It puts me to sleep. Like, for example, I can't. Yeah,
know?
I can't watch a fight and smoke a joint. I could watch a fight and drink a 6-pack of beer, no problem. If I watch a fight and smoke a joint or anything, a movie, whatever, out like Baby Yoda, just passes out. That's me when I smoke weed.
Yeah, it's not definitely not a activity enhancer as far as from an athletic point of view.
We should go golfing, Kev, and smoke a joint beforehand and see how good that works for both of us.
Probably do better. Probably do better than we normally do.
I think I would. I think for if we did like half a game, if we did like 9 holes or 8 holes or some shit, I think we'd be okay. I would be at least.
It helps with your focus a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, but I think if we get to that the later stages, I think it'd be an absolute mess. We'd be riding dirty like that one time, bro.
Yeah, we were pretty, but that was our first time golfing. So
that was my fault.
It's okay to be pathetic. Your first time on the golf course. So
to the listeners, I'll tell you what happened. I was driving the cart and I rode on the greens multiple times, and I think I was wearing no sleeves. Kev, we were just riding dirty that day. Everything was a mess.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of fun though.
It was a blast. Yeah, it was probably the best time I ever had golfing.
So yeah, can't do that anytime soon. It's so we're in Las Vegas, Nevada. If anybody doesn't know, that's where me and or John and I are based out of, and it's about 115 degrees outside. I'm inside with the AC, but I've been in and out all day, and every time I walk outside, it's like an oven out there. So we're gonna actually move on and recap some of the past week's action because we've been off for a couple weeks. So there's been actually a couple weeks ago boxing was completely loaded with action. We had Vasily Lomachenko against Masayoshi Nakatani, and that was on ESPN Plus. Then we had a pay-per-view on Showtime with featuring Gervonta Davis fighting for the WBA. What's the title called? Regular. 140-pound title against Mario Barrios. He put off a great, impressive performance. He struggled early. And then Lomachenko, he put on an excellent performance. I mean, he dominated the whole fight. So based on those two, one was Lomachenko fought at 135. Davis's fight was at 140. He moved up from his last fight from 130, so that was pretty impressive. He came out with a 11th round knockout of undefeated Mario Barrios. Who was more impressive to you out of those two fighters as far as their performances in general?
Gervonta Davis, for me, he's young, he's learning on the job, and you had mentioned like he had a rough start early in that fight, but what did he do? He adapted. He learned on the job. He's continuously getting better and better and better. Lomachenko, like he's getting older. I'm not saying he's on the decline, but look at the track record here in terms of like the amateur experience. He over 400 fights. As a professional, he hasn't fought much, maybe 2 times a year on average. But I mean, let's face facts. He's getting older. So who impressed me more is got to be Gervonta Davis because he's a young charge. He's someone that's up and coming. He's someone that adapts and shows differences during a fight. Like Lomachenko, we kind of know what we're going to get every single time. We know what to expect. Gervonta Davis is still a work in progress, and he impresses me. Like he definitely impressed me in that fight because I saw him make adjustments. I saw him mature, and that's what we like to see in fighters.
Yeah, right on. I mean, that was it was just good to see some pretty competitive fights, or at least like, well, the Lomachenko fight against Nakatani wasn't that close, but Nakatani was definitely game. I mean, he came to fight, and just to see some of the more bigger names in boxing, back on the platform. ESPN Plus was under the platform. It was it's $5.99 a month, and Davis's fight was on pay-per-view, so that was something that kind of disappointed me a bit because you had to pay $75 to see that, and that fight was Mario Barrios is just not a superstar. He's not a pay-per-view level opponent. So that was kind of disappointing, but Davis is definitely turning into a potential superstar in the sport of boxing.
Oh,
And he
100%.
continues to impress, in his fights. He's got, I think, 23 KOs in 24 fights. So when he gets in there, he's going to bring the action. You're going to get a definitive result for the most part. But obviously, we want to see him fight the fights where we don't think he's going to win. Guys like, Teofimo Lopez, even a Josh Taylor, who's the undisputed 140-pound champion. We'd love to see him fight him. We'd love to see him fight Devin Haney or even Ryan Garcia, even though Ryan Garcia is a little bit green. He's got a ton of followers on social media. He's an upcoming fighter who he moves the needle. He brings a lot of fans and, dollars to the table, a lot of eyes. So that's definitely something that I would love to see. Any upcoming fights you want to kind of talk about, or you want to give any other comments, or should we move on to news and notes about this past weekend's action?
Before I go there, I want to talk about what you just mentioned, all those wonderful names. Like, think about those kids, and they are still kids. They're all very young for the most part. Teofimo Lopez, Ryan Garcia, they're amazing. Like, if we have like some kind of thing that had transpired, in a different weight category years ago, there's a show on Showtime called The Kings, which breaks down Hagler, Hearns, Leonard, unbelievable fighters from that period of time. Okay. Like, we have the potential to have that now. If we could separate network divide, if we could separate egos and bullshit with money and just make these fights happen, Kevin, like, imagine Teofimo Lopez versus Gervonta Davis. That would be an amazing fight. A fight where you'd ask me and we'd watch it together, obviously, and you'd say, "Hey, Johnny, who do you got?" I have no fucking clue. Like, who would win that fight? Because there's so much potential for just chaos and just amazing, transformations. So I think we need to have that sort of thing in the boxing universe, and that is the weight category at 135 to 140 that could deliver the goods.
And I think that's what's going to get some of the casuals, I think, a little bit more excited about boxing. When you see, I don't know if you want to call them the best fighting the best, but they're equal matchups, at least on paper. And
exactly.
And also, what's good about these younger guys kind of getting, some popularity is the younger people, they're a little bit more savvy with how to market themselves as far as, online. And I mean, those guys, they pretty much have grown up their whole lives with cell phones, and they kind of know how to push themselves to the younger demographic. And that's kind of what we need in boxing, is the younger demographic to be excited about boxing, to be promoted in the non-traditional forms of media. And I think that's going to definitely get a lot of excitement and bring a whole new audience to boxing. Guys like Ryan Garcia, you see Teofimo Lopez, in articles and doing different things and basically talking a lot of crap and, dissing a lot of, his potential future opponents. So, I mean, they're keeping their names out there, and I think they're building their brand. Teofimo Lopez is going to be fighting pretty soon on Triller, which is a pretty big platform. So, yeah, it's definitely something we're obviously looking forward to. Any news and notes, things you want to talk about, John?
I look forward to Triller every single time they come on, mainly because Snoop Dogg is the best boxing commentator ever.
You,
We
you think
talked about
so?
we opened this show talking about pot. Okay, he gets his whole team high,
Yeah.
and he's
Yeah, I
funny,
kind of
and
I kind of beg to differ there. So
I think he's
um,
great.
I like his commentary, but I think in the right situation. So I think the Roy Jones and Mike Tyson fight, I thought that was a fairly good situation for him because it was a little bit of an older fan base that was watching that, and because it wasn't a real fight, I thought he brought a certain edge, and um, it wasn't. It was an exhibition, so I thought in that sense it definitely worked. I don't know if he would be necessarily good on a broadcast with real professional fighters on there. I don't know if he necessarily.
You don't think he'd be good with Larry Merchant?
I no, but mind you, I think he would definitely be good to be part of the broadcast, but kind of in a different, like more of a hosting capacity than somebody doing a play-by-play. I just think he's a little bit out of place there as far as a real professional event. I don't think people take it as seriously. That's just my personal opinion, but I definitely found him entertaining. I mean, he helped out the whole broadcast team on the Mike Tyson and Roy Jones fight. So he definitely brought just, I guess you could say, something new to the table. And we have to remember at the end of the day, what we're watching, this is entertainment, and people want to be entertained. People want to have a reason to come back. And he brought that to the table. So it's definitely something to think
He
about.
changed the game a little bit,
Yeah.
Kev, to be honest with you. If you watch a lot of boxing since then, to our listeners, this is my opinion, of course, but here's what's up. They've been a lot looser. They've been a lot more open-minded. They've been a lot more, not saying Snoop all the way, because Snoop will get you high on a broadcast and crack all these crazy jokes and do all this type of stuff. But I did notice that a lot of major platforms, okay, who? ESPN, Showtime, they've been a little bit more loose. They've been a little bit more open-minded. And that's why I love what Snoop is doing to the game and bringing.
Plus, we have to remember, too, is just because of Snoop Dogg's popularity, he brought a lot of attention to the fight itself. So I believe after the fight, I don't really pay a whole lot of attention too much to Twitter or social media a whole lot personally. But I do, from what I understand, it was the fight was trending. People were talking about it. And that brings a lot of attention to the sport of boxing, whether or not it's, obviously Roy Jones and Mike Tyson, they're not professional fighters anymore, and it was definitely a nostalgic type of event. But when people are talking about it, it's definitely good. It makes people remember that boxing is a sport that, was the biggest sport in the United States at one time, in the early part of the 20th century. Horse racing and baseball and boxing were the three biggest sports, in 1920 and 1930s and 40s. Those were the big sports, and boxing just has had such an impact, and some of that has went away. So some of the younger generation really needs to it needs to the younger generation to continue. The sport of boxing needs them to be kind of part of the equation. So there's definitely some positives and some negatives, and most of the time I tried to do my best to focus on the positive, and I think you did a good job of focusing on the positive of Snoop Dogg being involved in a boxing event. I thought it was definitely hilarious at the very least.
Amazing entertainment, and that's what it is, and that's what will get people coming on for the newer generation. Let's face facts, Kev. We live in a different world than we lived in many years ago. Now we're going to start to sound like our parents when we were kids, and blah blah blah, and this generation now, and blah blah blah. It's like, for me, we got YouTubers fighting, we got craziness going on, we got Snoop Dogg getting Al Bernstein high on Triller broadcasts. But people are still returning. They're coming back. If that's the way they got to do it, they got to do it. I love boxing. Boxing is a metaphor for life. I love pure boxing. I don't need the theatrics. I could look at an old school Hagler Hearns type of fight and whatever. Those guys get in the ring. They got no logos on the ring. Got no logos on their trunks. It's just a crazy like pit fight scenario. It's just like they're walking in. This is a fight. I wished for that. But do we ever get that kind of generation again? I don't know. They have to build the fan base back to what it used to be from yesteryear. Now, an organization that's doing one hell of a job is UFC. So for news and notes, guys, we have a third fight with Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor coming up. They both have one win apiece. Yeah.
Conor McGregor, wow! But bring us into that, because that was something
I will bring you in.
I haven't even really been paying attention to too much, but good luck to him. He's back. So who do you got in that one?
Woo!
Give us little history or background and what your thoughts on that big UFC fight. I think it's going to move the needle in Vegas. It's in Vegas, right, this weekend?
Yes, and it's going to move the needle big time. That's why it's definitely a part of
Arena, correct?
Yes, and that's why it's part of news and notes. Third installment of this epic trilogy that will finalize on Saturday if all things work according to plan. Both guys have won one fight apiece, both in very different ways, one by KO, one by submission. So I think it's going to be a very interesting fight. Conor has not looked great of late. I do believe he's going to look tremendous in this fight and get his I'm going to say motivation back. I think that a couple of his last fights, he's feeling himself on his, like, maybe he drank too much of his, whiskey that he made and the proper 12 and all that kind of stuff. I'm not trying to bust his balls. I'm saying I know he's better than what we saw recently, and I think a lot of listeners can agree if they follow the UFC. Now, Dustin Poirier, wow, great fighter, great grappler, great submission practitioner. It's going to be a very interesting fight. I think this is Conor's fight to win. So I'm going to go with Conor McGregor on this one. And if Conor wins, I would hope he stops here, because it doesn't get any bigger than this. This is the biggest fight in mixed martial arts that could take place right now. And I think that if Conor wins, he should go out very proud and knowing that he beat one of the best and at the craziest time of his own personal career, because his track record of late has not been good, both in boxing and mixed martial arts. But that's why we fight the fights. And I'm so looking forward to this one. Kev, I'm sure you could tell.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge MMA fan, but obviously this is going to be a pretty big one. From my understanding, McGregor, he got handled last time. So it's interesting to see if McGregor is kind of going to be worse this time around, or if he's going to figure out how to make an adjustment. But the first fight he won, but for my view is one guy is on the way. I wouldn't even say Poirier is on the way up, because they're both kind of on the older, like a little bit older fighters. They've been around a while. I just think McGregor this is more to me like a money grab for Conor McGregor, and Poirier seems to be more of the full-time professional prize fighter at this point. So if you had to kind of, I guess, twist my arm to say who I think is going to win, I'm going to go with the guy who won the last fight. I think he won by, was it a submission?
Yeah.
So do you know what the odds are on this one? Is Poirier a pretty good favorite, like a plus 200? I know UFC tends to have pretty close odds in most of
same as boxing. It's Dustin is the favorite, but they do fluctuate. But it's very close. And the closer we get to fight time, Kev, when the money comes in, the odds kind of balance out. I think on fight night, it's almost going to be even.
Okay, and that's obviously because McGregor is the bigger
popularity.
Name. Yeah, the late money is going to come in on Conor McGregor. And is there any significant undercards that we should talk about on this weekend's card, or you want to move on to any other news and notes, or you have anything else you want to add before we get going?
I could, talk about Gilberto Ramirez, 41-0, 27 KOs, great southpaw fighter at light heavyweight, taking on Sullivan Barrera, who is 22-3, 14 KOs.
And
Notable losses.
that's on the zone.
DAZN. Yep,
Okay, and
that's
that's Friday.
DAZN.
You said Friday night.
This is, I believe, Saturday. I could be wrong on
Okay.
that. Obviously, Sullivan Barrera known for beating Joe Smith, but also losing to Bivol, also losing to Andre Ward, who is one of the best fighters I've ever seen fight ever.
Yeah, there's no shame in losing to Andre Ward.
No.
And the main event is actually a very good fight. Was it Javier Fortuna against Joel Diaz Jr. for the I believe it's for the WBC interim. I always got to say interim lightweight title. So lightweight, 135 pounds. That's a pretty even fight. I like both guys, and it's definitely a good clash of styles. Fortuna, pretty solid puncher, and Diaz is just a solid former Olympian, former 130-pound champion. He lost his title in his last fight on the scales at 130 pounds. He was an IBF champion. And now he's moving up to 135, which would be a more comfortable weight for him. But I think biggest issue is he started his career at 126 pounds. I think Fortuna is just a naturally bigger guy. He's a big puncher. He's awkward. He kind of comes from that school of awkward fighters like Sergio Martinez. I believe he was part of his camp years back. So that's the style he fights in. He's a very difficult southpaw who can crack, and he's got pretty decent defense. So it's a good clash of styles, and
it's a great clash. I'm going to tell you why.
I think it's a great fight. I think it's going to be very entertaining. It's
very
under the radar, and I'm glad you brought that fight up, because I wasn't even aware that fight was going on this weekend. I'm definitely looking forward to it.
I love the fact that they're both southpaws too.
Yeah,
which always makes for a very intriguing fight, because when we see a conventional fighter against a southpaw, it's kind of like, sometimes it works. Manny Pacquiao is a great southpaw at making it not be so shitty. Like sometimes you see a southpaw against a conventional fighter and you're like, oh man, this is not very aesthetically pleasing. Both guys are southpaws. You mentioned the fact that Fortuna has pop. Yes, he does. He has 25 knockouts, okay, in his overall 39 fights. His overall record, 36-2-1, all right? And he only lost to Robert Easter, awesome fighter, only been knocked out once, Jason Sosa. For Joseph Diaz, he's at 31-1. Also, like I mentioned, a southpaw, 15 KOs, not bad. Only lost Gary Russell Jr. Guess what? Holy shit, Gary Russell Jr. is an awesome fighter when he decides to show up once every 5 years, but that's another story for another time. But we have two guys here that are very capable of putting on a fireworks display. Kev, I think that's going to be the fight of the weekend.
Yeah, the other fight you spoke of, Ramirez against Sullivan Barrera, that's not a bad fight either.
Not at all.
To, Golden Boy Promotions. I think this is a very good card, and I've actually been pretty happy for the most part with boxing. You know, this last year they picked up the pace a little bit. Even this last weekend, there was a couple decent fights. With Chris Colbert, who looks like a pretty good 130-pound prospect. I'm not even going to attempt to say the name of his opponent. That's for another day.
I'll call him Tug.
A tough fighter. I think his nickname is King Tug, something like that.
Yeah, let's just call him Tug.
Make an attempt to.
I could do the last name Nyangbiar. That's
okay,
easy,
there
but the first one name is.
I don't have the name in front of me, so
the first name is tough.
But yeah, Colbert's a pretty good looking prospect. He has a WBA interim 130-pound title, and but he's definitely a good looking prospect. He was actually in a boxing documentary from years ago. I believe when he first started his pro career, he was having some promotional problems, and he was in a very good documentary that documented, him coming up in Brooklyn, and he definitely seemed like a very good fighter to kind of look at, a good prospect. And then he kind of disappeared for a while just because of his promotional issues. And now he's with Al Heyman. You see him getting some, main events on Showtime, and he looks like he has a pretty promising career. He just needs some significant fights against some decent names. I was actually reading. I follow Stephen Breadman Edwards on Twitter, and he was talking about a potential fight with Gervonta Davis and Colbert, and I was kind of thinking that's actually a pretty good fight. I don't think it's going to happen, but it was interesting that he mentioned that. That's a potential. I wouldn't want to call it a super fight, but it's definitely a potentially like excellent clash of styles. A good, and both have, Colbert has a pretty good, interesting personality, and I just remember that from the documentary he was in. I don't really follow his career too much, but they used to call him Little B-Hop back in the day. I don't know if he still goes by that term, but he's a tough young fighter. He's got some things to obviously improve on, but he's only 15-0, and he's somebody to just keep your eye on in the near future. And anything else you want to add, John? Or you
I want to add to Chris and the fact that he is growing. Hopefully the man strength comes into play, because he is at 16-0 and with 6 KOs, I believe. So we want to see that develop. We know at lower weight classes that's something that takes time to put together, and there's only been a few people that can really bang at that weight category. Now, you mentioned about like something about him facing like a Davis, Tank Davis situation. That would be a big super fight for us as fight fans, because if we follow boxing, if we know these names, man, that's what this sport needs. That's what I was talking about before. So if you have not seen the Kings on Showtime, Duran, Leonard, Hagler, Hearns, all their stories documented, fleshed out. And if people say, well, I've heard about them so many times, I've known about this and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to sound like, the great Mayweather, who once said, you don't know shit about boxing, because I've learned so much about Sugar Ray Leonard on a personal level that I've never knew existed. I learned more about all these great people that I've idolized internally forever. Okay. So I didn't know shit about boxing. All right. So Kev, have you watched any of these episodes?
No, I haven't. I've just been hearing about them. Yeah, I haven't checked it out yet.
They're a phenomenal a documentary, not cliche. It is so real. It's so unbelievably real. And what I love is that they have old recordings of Emmanuel Stewart talking, and that when you hear that voice, because his voice is just so recognizable, and the way he talks about boxing is second to none. I'm getting choked up just thinking about it. I'm telling you, like right from the very beginning, there's only one more episode left I have to watch, because I think it's just a 4-part series, and they heavily document every fighter within the same thing. So it's not just one episode's dedicated to Leonard, one episode's dedicated to Hearns. They're all dedicated to everyone. I have to say this about Sugar Ray Leonard, a gentleman way beyond words. The way he describes things, the way he feels about his opponents. And mind you, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, he's the only one that beat all 3 of them, correct?
Yeah.
He's the only one that beat all 3. He beat Duran, right? And he lost to him the first time, but he beat him the second time. He beat Hearns.
Yeah, he has the best record in the round robin.
That's right. And
Tommy Hearns beat Roberto Duran.
That was one of the most vicious knockouts.
And then he had that draw, that dubious draw in the rematch with Leonard. And then Duran only beat Leonard. But I think out of all those fights, if we have to look at what was the most significant win, I would say Duran's win over Leonard, to me, was the most significant.
Yep.
or you could say Leonard beating Hearns. Well, you know what? I mean, all of them were such great fights. I mean, it's
Amazing.
because Hearns' knockout of Duran was just so beautiful. I mean, Duran had like an iron chin. I mean, to see him get knocked out like that, and then
Flat.
go on and still have a great career afterwards, and make some really good fights afterwards. Like his middleweight title win against Iran Barkley, who's a beast. His 12 rounds or his 15 round fight that he had with Marvin Hagler, where I think most people thought that Hagler was just going to run him over, and he made that a competitive fight. So,
who do you think won that fight? I'm putting you on a spot. Who won, Hagler or Leonard?
I thought Hagler won the fight, but I mean, you couldn't argue that Leonard won. But I really didn't think it was a situation where Leonard was necessarily winning the early rounds like that easily. I just thought Hagler started slow like he normally does, and it was a 12-round fight. And I think if it was a 15-round fight, I thought Hagler would have been able to make it a little bit more decisive. But some of those last rounds, I think, Leonard was so smart, he out-hustled him in some of the, late, 30 seconds in the rounds. He did those little flurries and kind of stole some of the rounds, I guess you could say. But either way,
I think a draw.
Out of all those guys, if I had to say in history who's the best from first to fourth, I would probably put Leonard as 1, Duran as 2, Hagler as 3, and I would put Hearns at 4. And I think If you wanted to kind of switch the order around, I think you could make a case in any order. If you really looked at the entirety of the guys' careers, I mean, you could even argue that Hearns was the best out of all the guys, even though he lost to two of the
Duran,
fighters.
and Hagler,
or he lost to Leonard and Hagler, but he had some other great
and
players.
also Leonard, he lost all three,
Cuevas, and he moved all the way up to light heavyweight. He beat Virgil Hill. I think Virgil Hill was undefeated at the time. For a former welterweight to move up to light heavyweight, that's almost unheard of, to beat a champion. So, former middleweight champion. So it's definitely interesting. Anything else you want to add, or?
No, you nailed it on the head right there. That's my order, my lineup that you mentioned for the Kings, and I want our listeners, please, if you like boxing, if you love a good documentary, a good story, if you love people that actually have compassion, because like I said, Ray Leonard, the way he presents himself and the way he talks about these people is unbelievable. It makes you want to go back and get your love affair back with boxing, get under the sheets with boxing, dim the lights, light a candle, and watch the Four Kings. I know, Kevin, that sounds really weird, but that's what I'm recommending. It's an amazing time.